I'm Margaret Thompson, 72 years old, and 3 months ago my own children threw me into Sunset Manor Nursing Home like yesterday's garbage. They told me it was temporary, just until they figured out my situation. But yesterday I overheard my daughter Linda on the phone with my son Michael. Mom's social security check came in, $400 this month. She won't remember anyway, so we'll just deposit it into our account like usual. Won't remember anyway. Those 4 words shattered something inside me that I didn't even know was still whole. You see, they think I have dementia. They've been telling everyone, the doctors, the neighbors, even themselves, that poor old Margaret is losing her mind. But here's what they don't know. I remember everything, every lie, every stolen dollar, every whispered conversation about how much easier their lives will be when I'm gone. Like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. Linda always was the clever one, the achiever, the one who made me proud when she graduated summa cum laude from nursing school, who landed that prestigious job at St. Mary's Hospital, who married that nice accountant and gave me 2 beautiful granddaughters. I used to brag about her to my friends at church, about how successful she'd become, how she'd really made something of herself. I never imagined she'd use her medical knowledge to destroy me. It started 6 months ago, during what I thought was a routine doctor's appointment. Dr. Peterson had been my physician for 15 years, a kind man who knew my health history better than I did. But that day, something felt different. Linda had insisted on driving me, had insisted on coming into the examination room to help explain my concerns. Mom's been having some memory issues, she told Dr. Peterson, her voice dripping with fake concern. She repeats herself constantly, forgets conversations we just had, gets confused about dates and times. I opened my mouth to protest, but Linda squeezed my shoulder in what looked like a loving gesture but felt like a warning. Just last week, she called me 3 times asking the same question about her medication schedule, and yesterday, she couldn't remember my daughter Emma's birthday, her own granddaughter. None of it was true. I remembered Emma's birthday perfectly, April 15th. The day she turned 16, and I'd given her my grandmother's pearl necklace. I remembered every conversation Linda and I had ever had, including the uncomfortable one 3 months earlier, when she'd asked me if I'd ever considered updating my will to reflect current property values. But Dr. Peterson was taking notes, nodding sympathetically, asking Linda questions about my decline instead of asking me directly. When had this started? Had I shown signs of confusion about familiar places? Was I having trouble managing my finances? She's been paying bills twice, Linda lied smoothly. And last month, she couldn't find her way home from the grocery store she's shopped at for 20 years. The police had to bring her back. The police. That was rich. I'd never been lost a day in my life. I could navigate this town blindfolded. Mrs. Thompson? Dr. Peterson finally addressed me directly. How are you feeling about your memory lately? Before I could answer fully, Linda jumped in. She thinks she's fine, doctor. That's part of the problem. She has no awareness of the issues. That's when I saw it. A folder in Linda's purse, partially visible, with what looked like medical forms sticking out. Forms that I'd never seen before, never signed. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. But I forced myself to stay calm, to play along until I could figure out the extent of her deception. Dr. Peterson prescribed monitoring and suggested I might benefit from additional support at home. Linda nodded earnestly, already volunteering to coordinate my care and help manage my medications. As we left the office, I felt like I was drowning, but I kept my expression neutral. Linda chattered about getting me the help I needed and making sure I was safe. Safe. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. That night, alone in my house, the house I'd lived in for 43 years, the house my late husband Harold and I had bought when Linda was just 5 years old, I sat in my kitchen and tried to process what had happened. My daughter, my firstborn, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, was systematically building a case for my incompetency. But why? The answer came to me like a cold wind through an open window. Money. It always came down to money, didn't it? People think that being a teacher means you're poor, that you struggle to make ends meet, that you retire with nothing but a modest pension and faded memories of unruly children. They couldn't be more wrong about my situation. Harold and I were smart with our money from the very beginning. When we bought this house in 1982 for $68,000, our friends thought we were crazy. It's too far from downtown, they said. You'll never see a return on that investment. The neighborhood was rough then, mostly working-class families struggling to get by, and our little 3-bedroom ranch was nothing special to look at. But Harold saw potential where others saw problems. He was a carpenter by trade, meticulous and patient, and he spent every weekend for 3 years transforming our humble house into something beautiful. He built custom cabinets in the kitchen, refinished all the hardwood floors himself, added a screened porch that became my favorite reading spot, and landscaped the yard with his own hands. Every improvement was paid for in cash. We never believed in debt for anything but the mortgage. I contributed too, of course. My teacher's salary might not have been impressive, but I was relentless about saving. Every summer, instead of taking expensive vacations like other families, I worked additional jobs. I tutored struggling students, taught summer school, and even cleaned houses when I needed extra income. Harold would joke that I could squeeze a penny until it screamed, but he said it with pride. We lived below our means for decades. While our neighbors bought new cars every few years, we drove our reliable Honda until it literally couldn't run anymore. While they went out to dinner 3 times a week, I cooked at home and packed Harold's lunch every single day. While they took cruises and expensive trips, we found joy in simple pleasures, walks in the park, library books, and Sunday drives to nowhere in particular. By the time Harold passed away 8 years ago, we owned our house outright and had accumulated a nest egg that would have surprised anyone who knew us. Harold's life insurance policy, combined with our savings and my teacher's pension, left me more financially secure than I'd ever imagined possible. But the real surprise came when the neighborhood began its transformation. What had once been a working-class area slowly became desirable. Young professionals started buying the old houses and renovating them. Coffee shops and boutique stores opened on our main street. Property values began climbing steadily, then rapidly. The house we'd bought for $68,000 was now worth over $800,000, according to the latest assessment. I never flaunted my financial security. I still drove my 10-year-old Camry, still shopped with coupons, still preferred cooking at home to eating out. But I wasn't naive about what I had either. I'd worked hard for every dollar, and I'd earned the right to enjoy my retirement without worrying about money. Linda and Michael knew about the house's value. Of course. They'd both made comments over the years about how lucky I was that property values had gone up so much. Linda had even suggested, more than once, that I might want to downsize to something smaller and more manageable. Each time, I politely declined. This house held 43 years of memories. Every room contained pieces of the life Harold and I had built together. But now I understood why they suddenly cared so much about my memory problems and my safety. It wasn't concern for their aging mother that motivated them. It was concern for their inheritance. They wanted control of my assets, and if they could prove I was incompetent, they could get it. What they didn't know was that I'd spent 35 years teaching high school students, which meant I'd spent 35 years dealing with liars, manipulators, and people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. I'd developed a sixth sense for deception, and I could smell their scheme from a mile away. I walked through my house that evening, touching the walls Harold had painted, running my fingers along the banister he'd sanded and stained, remembering all the birthday parties and Christmas mornings and quiet Sunday afternoons we'd shared in these rooms. They wanted to take this from me. They wanted to erase the life I'd built, the security I'd earned, the independence I'd fought for. Over my dead body, Michael was always the charmer, the one who could talk his way out of trouble with a smile and a joke. As a child, he'd break something valuable and somehow convince me it was an accident that deserved sympathy rather than punishment. As a teenager, he'd come home past curfew with elaborate stories about helping elderly neighbors or staying late to tutor struggling classmates. I wanted to believe him then, just like I'd wanted to believe him when he started visiting more frequently 6 months ago. Just checking on my favorite mom, he'd say, giving me one of those devastating smiles that had gotten him out of trouble. His entire life, he'd bring flowers from the grocery store, help me with small tasks around the house, and listen with apparent fascination to my stories about the old days. I was so starved for attention from my children that I didn't question this sudden devotion. But Michael had never done anything without an ulterior motive. and this newfound filial attention was no exception. The first red flag should have been his sudden interest in my finances. During one of his visits, he'd casually mentioned that he'd heard identity theft was becoming a real problem for seniors, and offered to help me organize my important documents to keep them safe. Before I knew it, he was sitting at my kitchen table with all my bank statements, insurance papers, and legal documents spread out in front of him. "Mom, you're sitting on a gold mine here," he said, his voice full of what I thought was admiration, but now realize was calculation. "This house alone is worth almost $1 million. And your portfolio, I had no idea you and Dad were such smart investors." I felt a flutter of pride at the time. Harold and I had been smart investors, cautious but consistent, and our retirement accounts had grown steadily over the decades. Michael seemed genuinely impressed by our financial discipline, and I enjoyed having someone finally appreciate the sacrifices we'd made. "You know, Mom, at your age, you might want to consider setting up a power of attorney," he suggested, his tone carefully casual, "just in case something ever happens and you need someone to help manage things. Linda and I could handle it together. You know we'd always have your best interests at heart." The conversation felt natural at the time, like a caring son looking out for his mother's future, but now I could see it for what it really was. The first step in a carefully planned takeover. What I didn't know then was that Michael's concern wasn't hypothetical. 3 weeks later, Linda called to tell me that Michael's construction business was struggling, that he'd made some bad investments and was facing serious financial difficulties. She asked if I might consider lending him some money to help him get back on his feet. "He's too proud to ask you himself," she said, her voice heavy with sisterly concern. "But he's really struggling, Mom. His credit is shot, and the bank won't extend his line of credit. If he can't make payroll next week, he'll have to lay off half his crew." I offered to help immediately. Michael was my son, and family helped family. But when I suggested writing him a check for $20,000, Linda quickly redirected the conversation. "Actually, Mom, it's more complicated than that. He needs someone to co-sign on a loan, someone with good credit and collateral. With your house and your financial standing, you could help him get the credit he needs without having to liquidate any of your own investments." That should have been red flag number 2. But I loved my son, and I wanted to help him succeed. I agreed to meet with his banker to discuss the details. The meeting was a disaster, though I didn't realize it at the time. Michael's financial difficulties were far worse than Linda had let on. He wasn't just struggling, he was drowning. Bad investments, cost overruns on projects, and what the banker delicately referred to as cash flow management issues had left him hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. But the real revelation came later, when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation between Michael and someone I assumed was his business partner. They were discussing the old lady and how much longer they thought they could keep her in the dark about the extent of his problems. Michael mentioned something about casinos and bad luck, and suddenly I understood what Linda had meant by cash flow management issues. My son wasn't just a failed businessman. He was a gambler, and apparently not a very good one. The pieces started falling into place after that. The sudden interest in my finances, the urgent need for power of attorney, Linda's convenient medical expertise in diagnosing memory problems. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a conspiracy, orchestrated by a desperate man who saw his elderly mother as his last chance to avoid financial ruin. Michael needed my money, and if I wasn't willing to give it to him voluntarily, he and Linda would find a way to take it. The fall happened on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 3 weeks after my appointment with Dr. Peterson. I remember the date because it was the same day I'd planned to call a lawyer about updating my will, something I'd been putting off since Harold's death, but finally felt ready to tackle. Never made that phone call. It started with Linda arriving unexpectedly at my house around 10 in the morning, claiming she had a few hours free between shifts and wanted to help me with some seasonal maintenance. She'd brought Michael with her, which should have been suspicious since he rarely visited without advance notice and certainly never volunteered for household chores. "We thought we'd check your gutters before winter, Mom," Linda said, giving me that bright, professional smile she used with difficult patience. "Michael brought his ladder, and I can help organize your winter clothes while he works outside." It seemed thoughtful, even though I hadn't asked for help with either task. My gutters were fine. I'd had them cleaned professionally just a month earlier, and my winter clothes were already organized in the cedar chest Harold had built for me years ago. But I was touched by their apparent concern and welcomed them into my home. Michael set up his ladder against the back of the house, near the kitchen door where the gutters were supposedly clogged. Linda busied herself in my bedroom, going through my closets with an efficiency that seemed more like searching than organizing. I made coffee and settled into my reading chair, grateful for the company, even if their timing was odd. That's when Linda called out from the bedroom, her voice tight with concern. "Mom, can you come help me reach something on the top shelf?" I walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, but as I passed the kitchen, Linda's voice came from behind me instead. "Actually, Mom, could you grab that box from the top of the refrigerator?" "First? The one with the extra blankets?" I turned back toward the kitchen, confused. There was no box of blankets on top of my refrigerator. I kept my extra linens in the hall closet, and Linda knew that. But as I approached the refrigerator to look, my foot caught on something. Michael's toolbox, sitting right in the middle of the walkway where it definitely hadn't been when I'd made coffee 10 minutes earlier. I went down hard, my right hip taking the brunt of the impact as I hit the kitchen floor. The pain was immediate and intense, radiating from my hip, down my leg, and up into my back. I cried out, more from shock than pain at first, but as I tried to get up, the agony nearly made me faint. Linda was beside me immediately, her medical training kicking in as she assessed my condition. But there was something in her expression, a flicker of satisfaction, maybe, or relief, that chilled me even through the haze of pain. "Don't try to move, Mom," she said, her voice professionally calm. "I think you might have fractured something. Michael, call 911. As we waited for the ambulance, Linda asked me questions about what had happened, and I found myself giving answers that didn't quite match my memory of events. She asked if I'd been dizzy before I fell, if I'd been confused about where I was going, if I remembered feeling disoriented. Sometimes with memory issues, spatial awareness can be affected, she explained to the paramedics when they arrived. She's been having some cognitive difficulties lately. Her doctor is monitoring the situation. At the hospital, Linda took charge of my care with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly how the system worked. She spoke to the doctors in medical terminology I didn't fully understand, explaining my recent cognitive decline and increasing confusion at home. She mentioned the appointment with Dr. Peterson, the concerns about my memory, the difficulty I was having managing independently. The X-rays showed a hairline fracture in my hip, not serious enough to require surgery, but significant enough to limit my mobility for several weeks. The doctor recommended physical therapy and suggested I might benefit from additional support at home during recovery. That's when Linda presented her solution. "I've been researching assisted living facilities," she told the doctor, as if this was something we'd discussed extensively. "There's a wonderful place called Sunset Manor that specializes in rehabilitation and memory care. They could provide the physical therapy Mom needs while also monitoring her cognitive health. Memory care." The words hit me like a physical blow. I tried to protest, to explain that I didn't need memory care, that I was perfectly capable of recovering at home with some help. But every time I spoke up, Linda gently redirected the conversation back to my confusion and safety concerns. She doesn't always have realistic expectations about her limitations, Linda explained to the doctor, speaking about me as if I weren't sitting right there. That's actually part of the cognitive issue, lack of insight into her own condition. By the time I left the hospital 3 days later, everything had been arranged. Linda had toured Sunset Manor, completed the paperwork, and convinced the discharge planner that I needed comprehensive care that couldn't be provided at home. Michael had cleaned out a suitcase with my essential items, and Linda had packed my medications with careful instructions for the nursing staff. As the ambulance transported me from the hospital to Sunset Manor, I stared out the window at the familiar streets of my neighborhood, wondering when I'd see them again. Everything had happened so fast, so smoothly, that I almost questioned my own perception of events. Almost. But I couldn't shake the memory of that toolbox appearing in my kitchen walkway, or the satisfied look in Linda's eyes as I lay on the floor in pain, or the way she'd had answers ready for every question the medical staff asked. The fall wasn't an accident. It was the final piece of their plan, the incident they needed to justify taking control of my life. Sunset Manor looked pleasant enough from the outside, a modern building with cheerful yellow siding and well-maintained landscaping that suggested competent care and comfortable living. The lobby was decorated in soothing pastels with artificial plants and inspirational posters about aging gracefully. It was the kind of place families chose when they wanted to feel good about warehousing their elderly relatives. But I wasn't fooled by the pleasant facade. This was a prison, and I was an inmate whose only crime was having assets that other people wanted. My room was small but clean, with a narrow hospital bed, a single dresser, and a chair positioned near the window that looked out over the parking lot. Linda had brought a few personal items from my house, some photographs, a couple of books, and my favorite throw blanket. But the space felt sterile and impersonal, nothing like the warm, memory-filled rooms I'd left behind. The daily routine at Sunset Manor was designed to keep residents compliant and manageable. Breakfast at 7, medications at 8, morning activities at 9, lunch at noon, rest time at 1, afternoon activities at 3, dinner at 5, evening medications at 6, bedtime preparations by 8. Everything was scheduled, supervised, and recorded in charts that followed us everywhere. During my first week, I made the mistake of trying to assert some independence. I asked to skip the morning cognitive stimulation activity, a patronizing exercise where residents were asked to identify pictures of common objects or remember the names of former presidents. The activity coordinator, a cheerful young woman named Brenda, gently insisted that participation was mandatory for residents with memory concerns. "But I don't have memory concerns," I said, keeping my voice level and reasonable. "There's been a misunderstanding about my condition." Brenda smiled the same patient smile I'd seen Linda use with confused patience. "I understand that you feel that way, Mrs. Thompson. That's very common with cognitive decline. Many residents don't recognize their own limitations, but your family was very clear about your needs when they enrolled you here." My family. The words tasted bitter. I tried. A different approach. Could I call my doctor? Dr. Peterson? "I'd like to discuss my treatment plan with him directly." "Of course, dear. We'll arrange for you to speak with Dr. Martinez, our staff physician. He'll be doing your care here at Sunset Manor." That wasn't what I'd asked for, but I realized that arguing would only reinforce their perception of me as confused and difficult. So I smiled and nodded and began planning my next move more carefully. The staff at Sunset Manor treated me with the kind of exaggerated patience reserved for people they considered mentally impaired. They spoke slowly and loudly, as if I were both deaf and simple-minded. They explained basic concepts multiple times, checked on me constantly to make sure I hadn't wandered off or forgotten where I was, and documented my every response in their charts. When I demonstrated perfect recall of recent events or complex reasoning skills, they attributed it to good days or moments of clarity. When I asked detailed questions about my care or requested information about my rights as a resident, they praised me for being so engaged and promised to look into that for you, dear. Linda visited twice during my first week, each time bringing fresh flowers and updates about my house. She'd hired a cleaning service to maintain the property while I was away, she said. She'd also taken the liberty of forwarding my mail to her address so nothing important would be missed. "Just temporary measures," she assured me, "until you're feeling better and ready to come home." But there was something in her tone that suggested she didn't expect that day to come anytime soon. When I asked specific questions about my mail or my bills, she waved off my concerns with vague reassurances about taking care of everything. Michael visited once, bringing a box of chocolates and an uncomfortable energy that filled the small room. He seemed nervous, unable to make eye contact for more than a few seconds at a time. He asked how I was adjusting and whether the staff was treating me well, but he didn't seem particularly interested in my answers. Most telling of all, he kept checking his phone and glancing at his watch as if he had somewhere more important to be. When I tried to talk about when I might be able to come home, he changed the subject to the weather or asked if I needed anything from the gift shop. Neither of my children asked about my hip, which was healing well, or about my physical therapy progress, which was ahead of schedule. They didn't inquire about my pain levels or my mobility or any of the medical concerns that had supposedly necessitated my placement at Sunset Manor. Their visits felt like obligations rather than expressions of love or concern. But the most disturbing realization came during my second week when I overheard a conversation between two nurses at the medication station outside my room. They were discussing my case with the casual efficiency of professionals reviewing a routine matter. The Thompson woman in 237, her family says she's been having increasing episodes of confusion and agitation. They want us to monitor her closely and document any behavioral issues. Has she been problematic? Not really. She seems pretty sharp, actually. But the daughter is a nurse, so she knows what to look for. Says the mother has been hiding her symptoms and might become combative if she feels challenged about her memory. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, as the full scope of their deception became clear. Linda hadn't just lied to get me placed here. She'd given them a roadmap for misinterpreting everything I said and did. If I acted confused, it would confirm their diagnosis. If I acted competent, it would be dismissed as temporary lucidity or evidence that I was hiding my symptoms. It was a perfect trap, and I was caught right in the middle of it. The first clue came 3 weeks into my stay at Sunset Manor, during what Linda called a routine visit to discuss my care plan. She sat across from me in the small activities room, a folder thick with papers spread across the table between us, wearing her most professional expression. "Mom, I want to go over some financial matters with you," she began, her voice taking on that carefully modulated tone she used when delivering bad news to patients' families. "Since you've been here, I've been managing your bills and making sure everything stays current." She pulled out what looked like bank statements, but when I tried to examine them more closely, she kept them angled away from me, pointing to specific lines while talking. "Your Social Security payment is being deposited directly into your account as usual," she said, tapping a line on the statement. "And I've arranged for your pension payments to be automatically transferred to cover your care here at Sunset Manor." Something cold settled in my stomach. "My pension covers the cost here?" "Well, most of it. Between your Social Security and pension, we're able to manage your expenses. I've also arranged for the rental income from your house to help with any additional costs." Rental income. I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "Linda, what rental income? I'm not renting my house to anyone." Her smile was patient, practiced. "Mom, remember we talked about this? The cleaning service I hired recommended renting out your house while you're recovering here. It's sitting empty anyway, and the rental income helps offset your care costs. It's really the most practical solution." I had no memory of any such conversation, because it had never happened. But Linda was already moving on, pulling out more papers and explaining other arrangements she'd made on my behalf. Utility bills transferred to her name for easier management. Insurance payments redirected to ensure continuous coverage. Investment account statements forwarded to her address to prevent mail theft. Every single aspect of my financial life had been systematically transferred to her control, all under the guise of helping me during my recovery. "I'd like to see those statements myself," I said, reaching for the papers. "And I want to call my bank to discuss these changes." Linda gently pulled the documents back toward her. "Mom, I know this is confusing, but these are complex financial matters. Dr. Martinez thinks it's best if you focus on your recovery and let me handle the business side of things. That's what power of attorney is for." Power of attorney. The words hit me like a slap. "Linda, I never signed a power of attorney." "Yes, you did, Mom. Remember? Michael and I explained that it was just a precaution in case something happened and you needed help managing things. You signed it right before your fall." I searched my memory frantically, but I couldn't recall signing any such document. There had been so many papers in those weeks before my accident, medical forms, insurance updates, various documents that Linda and Michael had presented as routine paperwork. Had I unknowingly signed away my rights? After Linda left, I lay awake that night thinking about numbers. Before Harold died, we'd carefully planned our retirement finances. My Social Security payment was $3,400 a month. My teacher's pension was $2,800. The house, which we'd owned free and clear, had minimal monthly expenses, maybe $800 for utilities, insurance, and maintenance. Even if Sunset Manor cost $3,000 a month, which seemed high for a shared room and basic care, my income should have been more than enough to cover it with money left over. So where was the excess going? And who was collecting the rental income from my house? The next day, I asked to speak with the billing office about my account. The staff was accommodating but ultimately unhelpful. They explained that my daughter handled all financial matters and that they weren't authorized to discuss my account details directly with me. But it's my account, I protested. Surely I have the right to know what my care costs and how it's being paid for. The billing clerk, a harried-looking woman named Joyce, gave me a sympathetic but firm smile. I understand your curiosity, Mrs. Thompson, but your family has requested that all financial communications go through them. It's actually quite common for family members to handle these matters for residents with cognitive concerns. Cognitive concerns. Those two words were becoming the excuse for everything. Why I couldn't see my own bank statements, why I couldn't make my own phone calls, why I couldn't question any of the arrangements that had been made on my behalf. But I wasn't giving up. That evening, during the brief window when residents were allowed supervised computer time in the community room, I attempted to log into my online banking account. The password I'd used for years no longer worked. When I tried to reset it using my security questions, the system informed me that my contact information had been changed and the reset code would be sent to a different email address, one I didn't recognize. They'd locked me out of my own financial accounts completely. The realization of what had been done to me was staggering. Linda and Michael hadn't just manipulated me into this place. They'd systematically taken control of every aspect of my financial life. My Social Security payments, my pension, my rental income, probably even my investment accounts. Everything was being funneled through them, with only enough allocated to Sunset Manor to keep me warehoused here while they spent the rest. I was being robbed in broad daylight, and the theft was being disguised as family care. Her name was Patricia Morales, and she'd been working at Sunset Manor for 8 years. Unlike most of the staff, who treated residents with professional cheerfulness that never quite reached their eyes, Patricia looked at me like she actually saw me. Not just another confused elderly person to be managed, but a human being with thoughts and feelings that mattered. It started with small things. While other nurses handed me my medications with perfunctory explanations, Patricia would sit on the edge of my bed and actually talk to me about what each pill was for and how I was feeling. When I mentioned that I'd been a teacher, she didn't respond with the usual patronizing, "How nice," but asked specific questions about what subjects I'd taught and what I'd enjoyed most about my career. "My daughter just started high school," she told me one evening while checking my blood pressure. "She's struggling with algebra, and her teacher doesn't seem to have much patience for kids who don't catch on right away." "I taught algebra for 15 years, I said. "It's all about finding the right way to explain it for each individual student. Some kids are visual learners, some need hands-on examples, some just need someone to break it down into smaller steps." Patricia's eyes lit up. "Would you be willing to talk to Maria about it? I mean, if you don't mind. She gets so frustrated and I hate seeing her struggle." The fact that she trusted me with something important to her, her daughter's education, told me that Patricia saw through the memory care label that everyone else seemed to accept without question. Over the next few weeks, our conversations became more personal, more real. It was Patricia who first noticed the discrepancies in my care plan. "Mrs. Thompson," she said one afternoon while helping me with physical therapy exercises, "can I ask you something? Your family says you have dementia, but your cognitive assessments don't support that diagnosis. You remember everything, you reason clearly, you handle complex conversations without any confusion. Have you been evaluated by a neurologist?" The question was like a key turning in a lock. Someone finally saw what I'd been trying to tell everyone for weeks. "No," I said carefully, unsure how much I could trust her, but desperate for an ally. "I haven't seen a neurologist. My daughter arranged for me to be placed here after I fell, but I don't think the diagnosis is accurate." Patricia frowned, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "That's concerning. Memory care placement usually requires extensive testing and documentation. Let me look into your file." 2 days later, she approached me during the evening medication round, her expression troubled. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you believe you belong here?" I looked into her kind, intelligent eyes and made a decision that would change everything. No, I said quietly. I don't have dementia. I don't have memory problems. My children are lying about my condition because they want control of my finances. Patricia didn't look shocked or dismissive. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. I thought so, she said. Your medical records from before your placement are thin. Mostly notes from your daughter about your supposed decline, but no actual neurological testing, no formal cognitive assessments, no documentation from specialists. And your behavior. Here doesn't match someone with dementia at all. She paused, checking the hallway again before continuing. Mrs. Thompson, what I'm about to tell you has to stay between us for now. I've been documenting discrepancies in your case, and I think you're right about your children. But we need to be very careful about how we handle this. Over the next week, Patricia began slipping me information about my rights as a nursing home resident, about elder abuse laws, and about resources available to people in my situation. She couldn't do anything official. Her job would be at risk if administration discovered she was questioning a family's placement decision. But she could make sure I had the knowledge I needed to advocate for myself. There's a legal aid organization that specializes in elder abuse cases, she told me one evening, pretending to adjust my pillows while actually sliding a folded piece of paper under my mattress. They have a hotline you can call, and they provide free consultations for cases like yours. The paper contained a phone number and the name of an attorney, Elena Rodriguez, who apparently had a reputation for taking on difficult elder abuse cases and winning them. The problem is, Patricia continued, you'll need evidence. Your family has been very careful to make everything look legitimate. You'll need proof that your placement here was based on false information, and proof that they're misusing your finances. That's when Patricia became more than just a sympathetic ear. She became my co-conspirator. I'm not supposed to do this, she said, but I'm going to start documenting every interaction you have that demonstrates your cognitive abilities. Every clear conversation, every complex task you complete, every example of perfect memory recall. We're going to build a case that proves you don't belong here. She also began observing my children's visits more closely, noting their behavior and listening to their conversations. It was Patricia who overheard Linda on the phone discussing my rental income with someone, and Patricia who noticed that Michael seemed more interested in asking about my possessions than about my health. They're not acting like concerned family members, she told me. They're acting like people managing an investment. Having someone believe me, someone willing to help me, changed everything. For the first time since my fall, I felt hope instead of despair. Patricia wasn't just a nurse doing her job. She was a decent human being who recognized injustice when she saw it and was brave enough to do something about it. But we both knew we had to be careful. If Linda or Michael suspected that someone at Sunset Manor was questioning their story, they might move me to another facility, one where I wouldn't have Patricia's support. Our investigation had to be covert, methodical, and absolutely secret. The real estate listing appeared online on a Thursday morning in November, exactly 6 weeks after my placement at Sunset Manor. Patricia discovered it during her lunch break while researching something else entirely. And the expression on her face, when she showed me the screen, told me everything I needed to know. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thompson, she said, angling her phone so I could see the familiar yellow siding and red front door of my home. I was trying to find the assessed value of your house for our documentation, and this came up. There it was, in glossy professional photographs that made my heart ache. 1247 Maple Street, listed for $850,000 by Reynolds and Associates Real Estate. The description called it a charming renovated ranch in desirable neighborhood with original hardwood floors, updated kitchen, screened porch, and mature landscaping. Every detail of the listing was accurate, from the hand-built cabinets Harold had crafted in the kitchen to the flowering dogwood tree we'd planted the year Linda started kindergarten. Someone had been inside my house recently, staging it for sale, arranging my furniture and personal belongings to appeal to potential buyers. The listing agent was someone named Jennifer Reynolds, and according to the contact information, all inquiries were to be directed through Linda Thompson, representing the family estate. Estate. As if I were already dead. How can they sell my house? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I never agreed to this. I never signed anything giving them permission to sell my home. Patricia's jaw was tight with anger. The power of attorney, she said. If they have legal authority to make financial decisions on your behalf, they can probably sell your property without your direct consent, especially if they claim it's necessary for your care. I felt like I was drowning. The house wasn't just my biggest asset. It was my life, my history, the place where I'd planned to live until I died. Every room held memories of Harold, of raising my children, of the quiet, simple happiness we'd built together over 43 years. Look at this, Patricia said, scrolling through the listing photos. They've removed all your personal items, your family pictures, your books, Harold's workshop tools. Everything that made it your home is gone. She was right. The photos looked beautiful but sterile, like a model home designed to appeal to strangers. My reading chair was gone from the living room. The quilt my mother had made was missing from the master bedroom. Harold's workbench, where he'd spent countless hours building and fixing things, had been cleared of all his tools and equipment. They'd erased me from my own home. Where did they put my things? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Patricia continued scrolling through the listing details. It says here that the sale includes some furnishings, but personal items have been thoughtfully relocated. That's real estate speak for thrown away or donated. The betrayal was breathtaking in its completeness. Not only were Linda and Michael stealing my money and selling my house without permission, they were destroying 43 years of accumulated memories in the process. Pictures of Harold, souvenirs from our modest travels, books I'd collected over decades of teaching, all of it considered worthless clutter to be disposed of before the sale. We need to document this, Patricia said, taking screenshots of the listing on her phone. This proves they're liquidating your assets without proper authorization. No legitimate power of attorney would allow them to sell your home while you're capable of making your own decisions. But even as she spoke, I could see the problem. According to everyone's official records, I wasn't capable of making my own decisions. I was a confused, elderly woman with dementia, safely housed in a memory care facility while my devoted children managed my affairs. The real estate listing would look like responsible financial planning to anyone who didn't know the truth. How long do I have? I asked. Patricia checked the listing details again. Properties in this neighborhood usually sell pretty quickly, especially at this price point. Maybe a few weeks, maybe a couple of months if the market is slow. A few weeks? In a few weeks, everything Harold and I had worked for, everything we'd built together, would belong to strangers. The kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, the bedroom where we'd whispered our dreams and fears to each other, the yard where we'd watched our children play, all of it would be gone forever. That night, I lay in my narrow nursing home bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about my life. I thought about Harold and how proud he'd been of our little house, how he'd loved every project and improvement we'd made together. I thought about all the holidays we'd celebrated there, all the quiet Sunday mornings reading the paper on the screened porch, all the simple domestic happiness that had filled those rooms. Linda and Michael were stealing more than my money. They were stealing my history, my identity, my right to control my own life. They were betting that I was too old, too weak, and too isolated to fight back. They were wrong. Patricia, I said the next morning when she came to check on me, I want to call that lawyer. Elena Rodriguez. I don't care how risky it is or what it might cost. I want my life back. Patricia smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her in weeks. I was hoping you'd say that, she said, because I've been doing some research, and I think we have a stronger case than we realized. Your children have made some mistakes in their rush to take control of your assets. Big mistakes. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. And I may have found someone else who can help us. Someone who knows your family better than they think. The small digital voice recorder was no bigger than a matchbox, with a simple one-button operation that even arthritic fingers could manage easily. Patricia had brought it to me wrapped in a washcloth, tucked inside my clean laundry like contraband. Nephew works in electronics, she explained in a whisper as she showed me how to use it. He says this one has 40 hours of recording time, and the audio quality is excellent. But Mrs. Thompson, you have to be extremely careful. If your children or the administration discover you're recording conversations, it could make everything much worse. I understood the risks, but I also understood that without evidence, I was just another confused elderly woman making wild accusations about her loving family. The recorder was my chance to prove that I was completely lucid, mentally competent, and the victim of a deliberate conspiracy. "I'll be careful," I promised, slipping the tiny device into the pocket of my cardigan. "But I need proof of what they're doing, and this might be my only chance to get it." The first test came that afternoon during my session with Dr. Martinez, the staff physician who supposedly oversaw my care but rarely spent more than 5 minutes actually talking to me. Patricia had suggested that I engage him in detailed conversations to demonstrate my cognitive abilities, and the recorder would capture every word. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Martinez said, settling into the chair across from me with my chart balanced on his lap. "How are you feeling today?" I pressed the record button through the fabric of my pocket and smiled pleasantly. "I'm feeling quite well, thank you. Dr. Martinez, I'd like to discuss my treatment plan and particularly the medications you've prescribed for me." He looked surprised. Most residents, I gathered, didn't ask detailed questions about their care. "Of course. You're currently taking a low-dose antidepressant to help with mood stability and a mild sleep aid to ensure you get adequate rest." "I see. And what specific symptoms led you to prescribe the antidepressant?" "I haven't felt depressed, and I'd like to understand the medical reasoning behind this medication." Dr. Martinez consulted his chart, clearly uncomfortable with my direct questions. "Well, your family expressed concerns about mood changes related to your cognitive decline. Depression often accompanies dementia, so we prescribed it as a preventive measure." "Dr. Martinez, what specific tests were used to diagnose my dementia?" "I'd like to see the results of my neurological evaluation and cognitive assessments." There was a long pause. "Mrs. Thompson, those evaluations were conducted before your admission here. Your family provided the necessary documentation about your condition, but surely you've conducted your own assessments since I've been here. After 6 weeks of observation, you must have clinical evidence of cognitive impairment to support the diagnosis." Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Thompson, I think perhaps we should schedule a more comprehensive discussion about your care. In the meantime, let's focus on your physical therapy progress." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, during which I demonstrated perfect recall of dates, names, and complex information, while Dr. Martinez grew increasingly uncomfortable with my questions. When he left, I knew the recording would clearly show a mentally competent woman being gaslit by a medical professional who had no actual evidence to support her supposed diagnosis. Over the next 2 weeks, I recorded everything: conversations with staff members who spoke to me like a child despite my articulate responses, discussions with activity coordinators where I demonstrated knowledge of current events, complex problem-solving skills, and detailed memories going back decades, phone calls with Linda, where she dodged my questions about my finances and redirected every conversation back to my health concerns. The most damning recording came during Linda's visit the following Tuesday. She arrived with her usual flowers and forced smile, settling into the visitor's chair with a folder of papers that she kept carefully angled away from me. "Mom, I wanted to update you on some of the arrangements I've made for your care," she began, and I discreetly activated the recorder. "Linda, before we discuss that, I want to know about my house. I saw online that it's been listed for sale. When did we discuss selling my home?" Her pause was telling. "Mom, we've talked about this several times. You agreed that maintaining the house while you're here doesn't make financial sense." "I have no memory of agreeing to sell my house, Linda. In fact, I specifically remember telling you that I wanted to keep it because I hoped to return there when my hip healed." "Mom, that's exactly the kind of memory confusion Dr. Peterson warned us about. You think you remember things one way, but your recollection isn't reliable anymore." I kept my voice calm and clear. "Linda, can you tell me the exact date when I supposedly agreed to sell the house? And who was present during this conversation?" Another pause. "I don't remember the exact date, Mom. These conversations happen gradually, over time." "I see. And the power of attorney document that gives you authority to make these decisions. Can you show me my signature on that paperwork?" "Mom, you're getting agitated, and Dr. Martinez says that stress can make your symptoms worse. Let's talk about something more pleasant." But I wasn't finished. "Linda, I'd also like to know about my Social Security payments. Are they still being deposited into my personal checking account? Your finances are being handled appropriately, Mom. You don't need to worry about those details. But they're my finances, Linda. Surely I have the right to know how my own money is being managed. Mom, this is exactly what we mean about your confusion. You're not able to handle complex financial matters anymore, and that's why Michael and I are taking care of everything for you. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, during which Linda systematically avoided every direct question I asked, while repeatedly referring to my confusion and memory problems. Not once did I display any actual confusion or memory loss. Not once did she provide specific evidence of the cognitive decline she claimed to be managing. When she left, I had 43 minutes of recorded conversation that clearly demonstrated my mental competency and her deliberate deception. That evening, Patricia helped me transfer the audio files to a secure email account she'd created for me. These recordings are gold, she said after listening to a few segments. They prove that you're completely lucid and that your daughter is gaslighting you about your supposed memory problems. But the real breakthrough came the next day, when Patricia approached me with news that changed everything. Mrs. Thompson, remember I mentioned someone else who might be able to help us? Someone who knows your family better than they think? She smiled. Your granddaughter Sarah called the facility this morning. She wants to visit you this weekend, and she specifically asked to speak with you privately. Sarah walked into my room on Saturday afternoon, looking nothing like the confident young woman I'd last seen at Christmas dinner nearly a year ago. My 22-year-old granddaughter seemed tired, stressed, and carrying the weight of something heavy on her shoulders. She hugged me tightly, holding on longer than usual, and I could feel the tension in her body. "Grandma Margaret," she said, settling into the visitor's chair and immediately glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I'm so sorry I haven't visited sooner. Mom told me you were. She said you weren't really up for visitors." "What exactly did your mother tell you about my condition?" I asked, studying her face carefully. Sarah hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "She said you have dementia, that you're confused most of the time and don't really recognize people anymore. She said visiting you would just upset you and that it was better to remember you the way you used to be." I felt a flash of anger so intense it nearly took my breath away. Linda had been systematically isolating me from everyone who might question her story, including my own granddaughter. "Sarah, do I seem confused to you right now?" She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. "No," she said slowly. "You seem exactly like yourself. You always did. Even the few times I've talked to Mom about visiting, something felt off about her explanations." "What do you mean?" Sarah glanced at the door again, then leaned closer. "Grandma, can I ask you something? And will you promise to tell me the truth?" "Of course. Do you know why I'm really here? It's not just because I missed you, although I did. It's because something strange is happening with Mom and Uncle Michael, and I can't figure out what it is." My heart began beating faster. What kind of strange things? Money things. 3 weeks ago, Mom paid off my entire student loan balance, $28,000, in a single payment. When I asked her how she could afford that, she said she and Dad had been saving for years to help with my education. Sarah paused, running her hands through her hair. "But Grandma, I know my parents' financial situation. Dad's been struggling with his practice, and Mom's been picking up extra shifts just to cover their mortgage. There's no way they had $28,000 sitting around." The pieces began falling into place. My granddaughter was smart enough to recognize that her mother's sudden financial generosity didn't match their known circumstances. Then yesterday, Mom mentioned that they're looking at buying a new house, a much bigger, more expensive house. She said something about finally having the financial flexibility to upgrade our living situation. Sarah leaned even closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Grandma, where would that money be coming from? And why won't anyone let me visit you? When I insisted on coming today, Mom got really upset and tried to talk me out of it. She said it would be traumatic for both of us. I made a decision that would either save me or destroy my relationship with my granddaughter forever. Sarah, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Everything your mother has told you about my condition is a lie. I don't have dementia. I'm not confused. I was placed here against my will, based on false medical information, and your mother and uncle are stealing my money." I watched her face, carefully, looking for signs of disbelief or dismissal. Instead, I saw recognition. "I was afraid of that," she said quietly. "Grandma, there's something else. Last week I was at Mom's house helping her with some paperwork, and I saw bank statements spread out on her kitchen table. Your name was on some of them." My pulse quickened. "What did you see?" "Regular deposits. Large amounts. Social Security payments, pension payments, and something labeled as rental income. When I asked Mom about it, she said she was helping manage your finances while you recovered." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me a photo she'd apparently taken when Linda wasn't looking. It was a bank statement for an account I'd never seen before, but it clearly showed deposits of my Social Security and pension payments, along with monthly deposits of $2,500 labeled property. Rental income. "Grandma, are you renting out your house?" "No, I never agreed to rent my house to anyone. And I certainly never agreed to have my Social Security payments deposited into an account I don't control." We sat in silence for a moment while Sarah processed this information. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. "What do you want me to do?" I thought about Patricia's warnings about being careful, about the risks of involving family members who might betray my trust, but looking at Sarah's honest, concerned face, I realized she might be my best hope for getting out of this situation. "Sarah, I'm going to share something with you, but I need your word that you won't tell your mother or uncle what we've discussed today." "You have my word." I told her everything. The fake fall, the forged medical records, the systematic takeover of my finances, the sale of my house without my consent. I told her about Patricia and the recordings I'd been making. I told her about the legal aid attorney I wanted to contact but couldn't reach from inside Sunset Manor. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that surprised me. "Grandma, I think I can help you, but we have to be really smart about this." She pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. "I'm going to give you my phone number and my email address. I'm also going to research this Elena Rodriguez lawyer and see if I can contact her on your behalf. Sarah, this could get very messy. Your mother isn't going to forgive you for helping me." My granddaughter looked at me with an expression that reminded me of myself at her age. Determined, principled, and not afraid of a fight. "Grandma, what Mom and Uncle Michael are doing is wrong. It's theft, and it's elder abuse, and I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen just because they're family." She paused, then added, "Besides, you paid for my college education through the scholarship fund you and Grandpa Harold set up. You've been taking care of me my whole life. Now, it's my turn to take care of you." The legal research began in earnest the day after Sarah's visit. Using the computer time allotted to residents for cognitive stimulation, I spent hours learning about elder abuse laws, power of attorney regulations, and nursing home residents' rights. What I discovered both encouraged and terrified me. On the encouraging side, what Linda and Michael were doing to me constituted multiple serious crimes: financial exploitation of an elderly person, fraud, forgery, false imprisonment. The list went on. If I could prove my case, they could face significant criminal charges and would be required to return every penny they'd stolen. On the terrifying side, I learned how difficult these cases were to prove and how often elderly victims were dismissed as confused or vindictive. The legal system was designed to protect vulnerable seniors, but it often ended up protecting the very family members who were abusing them. The key to everything would be proving my mental competency. As long as I was officially considered cognitively impaired, my testimony would carry little weight in court. I needed independent medical evaluation by a neurologist who specialized in dementia, and I needed documentation that my current physicians had never actually tested me for cognitive decline. Patricia helped me compile a list of everything I needed: my complete medical records from before my placement at Sunset Manor, documentation of the power of attorney that Linda claimed I'd signed, bank records showing the transfer of my assets, and evidence that my house was being sold without my informed consent. But the most important discovery came when I found my original will hidden in the back of the closet in my room, tucked inside a book that Linda had brought from my house. It was different from what I expected. According to the will I drafted with my lawyer 5 years ago, my assets were to be divided equally between Linda and Michael, with specific provisions for Sarah's education and a substantial donation to the literacy program at the local library. But there was also a clause I'd forgotten about, a provision that if either of my children attempted to have me declared incompetent or sought to control my assets while I was still alive, they would forfeit their inheritance entirely. Harold had insisted on that clause. People change when money's involved, he'd said. If our kids ever try to push you around or take advantage of you, they should know there will be consequences. At the time, I'd thought he was being overly cautious. Now I realized he'd been protecting me from exactly what was happening. But here was the problem. Linda had mentioned during one of her visits that they were updating my will to reflect current circumstances. I suspected they'd created a forged version that removed the protective clause and possibly changed the distribution of assets in their favor. Sarah called me that Wednesday evening, using the room phone during visiting hours when calls were allowed. "Grandma, I've been busy," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I contacted Elena Rodriguez, and she wants to meet with you as soon as possible. She says your case has all the hallmarks of systematic elder abuse, and she's willing to take it on contingency." "What does that mean?" "It means she won't charge you anything up front, but she'll take a percentage of whatever money she recovers for you." "Grandma, she specializes in cases like this, and she has a really good success rate." My heart lifted for the first time in weeks. "When can she see me?" "That's the tricky part. She can't come to Sunset Manor without raising suspicions. And you can't leave the facility without family permission. But she has an idea." Sarah explained Elena's plan. As my granddaughter, Sarah could request to take me on an outing for therapeutic purposes, maybe lunch at a nearby restaurant or a visit to the library. During that outing, we could meet with Elena privately to discuss my case and begin building a legal strategy. "But Grandma, once we do this, there's no going back. Mom and Uncle Michael will know we're fighting them, and they might try to move you to another facility or take other steps to prevent you from getting legal help." I thought about Harold, about our house being sold to strangers, about Linda's satisfied smile as she deposited my Social Security checks into her own account. I thought about all the other elderly people who might be suffering similar abuse because they didn't have anyone willing to fight for them. "Sarah, I'd rather die fighting for my rights than live as a prisoner in my own life." "Okay. Elena can meet with us this Saturday. I'll tell Mom I want to take you out for lunch to cheer you up." The rest of the week passed slowly, each day bringing new indignities and fresh evidence of my children's deception. Linda called twice to check on my condition, and both times I recorded our conversations. Michael visited once, spending most of the time on his phone dealing with what sounded like business problems, probably caused by his gambling debts and poor financial decisions. Most telling of all, neither of them seemed interested in my actual health or well-being. They didn't ask about my physical therapy progress, my pain levels, or my emotional state. They treated me like a problem that had been solved rather than a person they supposedly loved and were trying to help. Patricia continued, documenting my cognitive abilities and gathering evidence of the staff's failure to properly evaluate my mental state. She'd also started asking subtle questions of other nurses about the protocols for admitting memory care patients. And she'd discovered that Sunset Manor had accepted Linda's word about my condition without requiring the independent medical evaluation that state regulations mandated. "They cut corners because your daughter is a nurse, and they trusted her professional judgment," Patricia explained. "But that's actually good for our case. It proves they didn't follow proper procedures." On Friday night, as I lay in my narrow bed listening to the sounds of the nursing home settling into its evening routine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not naive optimism, but real, substantial hope based on concrete plans and competent help. Tomorrow, I would begin fighting back. Tomorrow, Linda and Michael would discover that they'd underestimated their victim. Tomorrow, I would start reclaiming my life. The letter began with a single word that made my hands shake as I wrote it. Today. Not "Dear Elena" or "To whom it may concern," but simply today. Because after weeks of feeling like my life was suspended in amber, this felt like the first real day I'd had since my children's betrayal began. Sarah had suggested I write down everything I could remember about my life, my relationship with my children, and the events leading up to my placement at Sunset Manor. Elena will want to know details, she'd said during our phone call the night before. The more specific information you can provide, the stronger your case will be. So I wrote. For 3 hours, I filled page after page with my careful teacher's handwriting, documenting my life with the precision I'd once used to grade essays and create lesson plans. I wrote about Harold and our 40-year marriage, about the house we'd bought and improved together, about our careful financial planning, and modest but comfortable retirement. I wrote about Linda's nursing school graduation, about Michael's construction business, about the grandchildren I'd helped raise and educate. I wrote about the subtle changes in my children's behavior over the past year, Linda's sudden interest in my financial affairs, Michael's unexpected visits and offers to help, the way they'd started treating me like I was fragile and confused, even when I was neither. Most importantly, I wrote about my memory. In precise detail, I documented events from my childhood, my teaching career, my marriage, and recent conversations. I listed the names of students I'd taught decades ago, the plots of books I'd read last month, the exact dates of birthdays and anniversaries going back 50 years. I described the pharmacy where I'd filled prescriptions for 15 years, the grocery store where I'd shopped twice a week, the routes I'd driven around town without ever getting lost. I wrote about the book club I'd belonged to for 8 years, recalling the titles we'd discussed and the opinions I'd expressed about each one. By the time I finished, I had created an 18-page document that demonstrated not only perfect memory function, but also the kind of detailed, organized thinking that would be impossible for someone with dementia. The real test came that afternoon during my weekly session with Dr. Martinez. I decided to be more aggressive in challenging his assessment of my condition, and I had the recorder running from the moment he entered my room. Doctor, I've been doing some research about dementia diagnosis and treatment, I began, settling back in my chair with my handwritten letter folded in my lap. I'd like to discuss the specific criteria you use to confirm my cognitive decline. He looked immediately uncomfortable. Mrs. Thompson, I think perhaps these medical details are too complex for... Doctor, I taught high school biology for 12 years before switching to algebra. I'm quite capable of understanding medical terminology and diagnostic criteria. I proceeded to quiz him about the standard tests used to evaluate cognitive function. The mini mental state examination, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, neuroimaging, studies, blood tests to rule out other causes of confusion. For each test I mentioned, I asked when I'd been given it and what my scores were. Dr. Martinez grew increasingly flustered as it became clear that I'd never been given any of these standard evaluations. His notes contained only Linda's reports of my supposed symptoms and his own cursory observations during brief visits. Mrs. Thompson, your family provided comprehensive information about your condition. Doctor, my family isn't qualified to diagnose dementia. They're not neurologists or psychiatrists. Shouldn't my cognitive status have been independently verified before I was placed in memory care? The silence that followed was damning. In 43 minutes of recorded conversation, Dr. Martinez couldn't cite a single objective piece of evidence supporting my dementia diagnosis. Every aspect of my treatment was based on secondhand reports from Linda and Michael. When he left, I knew I had the proof I needed that my medical care at Sunset Manor was based on fraud rather than legitimate clinical assessment. That evening, Patricia helped me organize all my documentation. The recordings of my conversations with Dr. Martinez, Linda, and various staff members. The 18-page letter detailing my memories and experiences. The photographs Sarah had taken of the bank statements showing my stolen Social Security payments. This is powerful evidence, Patricia said, reviewing everything one more time. But Margaret, you need to be prepared for what comes next. Once you file a legal complaint, your children are going to fight back hard. They might try to have you move to another facility, or claim you're having a psychiatric emergency, or find other ways to discredit your testimony. I understood the risks. But I also understood that this might be my only chance to escape the trap Linda and Michael had built around me. Patricia, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you helping me? You could lose your job if administration finds out you've been assisting me with this. She was quiet for a moment, then smiled sadly. My grandmother went through something similar 10 years ago. Not exactly the same. It was her stepchildren, not her biological kids. But the pattern was the same. Financial exploitation, fake medical problems, isolation from people who might have helped her. What happened to her? She died in a nursing home, believing that no one loved her and that she was a burden on her family. I was young and didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. Patricia's voice grew firm. I swore I'd never let that happen to another elderly person if I could prevent it. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Two women from different generations, united by a shared sense of justice and determination. Tomorrow changes everything, I said finally. Yes, it does. Are you ready? I thought about Harold, and how proud he'd be to see me fighting for the life we'd built together. I thought about the students I'd taught over the years, and how I'd always encouraged them to stand up for themselves and others. I thought about Sarah, willing to risk her relationship with her mother to do what was right. I'm ready. Elena Rodriguez looked nothing like what I'd expected from a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. She was younger than Linda, probably. In her early 40s, with kind eyes and the sort of practical demeanor that suggested she'd seen enough injustice to be outraged by it, but not enough to be defeated by it. We met at a quiet corner table in Morrison's Diner, a family restaurant that Sarah had chosen because it was far enough from Sunset Manor to avoid unwanted attention, but close enough to justify as a therapeutic outing for an elderly resident. Mrs. Thompson, Elena said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. Sarah has filled me in on the basics of your situation, but I want to hear the whole story from you, in your own words. So I told her everything, starting with Harold's death 8 years ago, and ending with the phone conversation I'd overheard 3 days earlier. Elena took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions or requesting specific dates and amounts. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me carefully. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to be very direct with you. Based on what you've told me and the evidence Sarah has shown me, I believe you're the victim of systematic elder abuse. However, proving that in court will be challenging. She explained the obstacles we'd face. Linda and Michael had been careful to make their actions look legitimate. They had power of attorney documentation, medical records supporting my supposed cognitive decline, and a plausible story about concerned children caring for their aging mother. The good news, Elena continued, is that they've also made several critical mistakes. The lack of proper neurological evaluation before your nursing home placement violates state regulations. The sale of your house without clear documentation of your consent could constitute fraud. And the systematic transfer of your assets to accounts you don't control shows a pattern of financial exploitation. Patricia, who had joined us using her lunch break, leaned forward. What's our first step? We need independent medical evaluation of Mrs. Thompson's cognitive status, Elena said. I have relationships with several neurologists who specialize in these cases. We need comprehensive testing that proves she doesn't have dementia and never did. She turned to me. Mrs. Thompson, are you prepared for the possibility that this evaluation might take place without your children's knowledge? It would mean leaving Sunset Manor under false pretenses. I didn't hesitate. Yes. The second step is getting access to your financial records. Sarah has provided some evidence, but we need complete documentation of how your money has been handled since you were placed in the nursing home. Elena pulled out a business card and handed it to Patricia. This is a private investigator who works with me on these cases. He can trace financial transactions and document the movement of assets in ways that will hold up in court. How long will all of this take? I asked. If we're lucky and your children don't become suspicious, maybe 3 weeks. If they realize what we're doing and try to interfere, it could take months. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Grandma, are you sure you want to do this? Once we file legal papers, there's no going back. Mom and Uncle Michael will know you're fighting them. I thought about the question seriously. These were my children, the babies I'd rocked to sleep, and the teenagers I'd worried about, and the adults I'd hoped would care for me in my old age. Taking legal action against them felt like admitting that I'd failed as a mother, that I'd raised people capable of betraying their own family. But then I thought about Harold and the life we'd built together. I thought about my house being sold to strangers and my memories being discarded like trash. I thought about other elderly people who might be suffering similar abuse with no one willing to help them. Elena, if we win this case, what happens to Linda and Michael? If we can prove criminal fraud and elder abuse, they could face prison time. At minimum, they'll be required to return all the money they've stolen, plus penalties and legal fees. They'll also lose any claim to your estate. And if we lose, Elena's expression grew serious. If we lose, they'll have even more control over your life than they do now. They could move you to a facility where you'd have less contact with the outside world. They could argue that your legal action proves you're mentally unstable and need even more restrictive care. The risks were enormous. But the alternative, spending the rest of my life as a prisoner in my own family's greed, was unacceptable. Let's do it, I said. Elena smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Sarah, I'm going to need you to be very careful over the next few weeks. Your mother can't suspect that you're helping your grandmother with this. I understand. Patricia, I'll need you to document everything. Every conversation Mrs. Thompson has that demonstrates her cognitive abilities. Every instance where staff fails to follow proper procedures. Every visit from her children where they avoid discussing her actual medical condition. Patricia nodded. I've been doing that already. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to arrange for your neurological evaluation to happen this week. We'll use a medical transport service that specializes in taking nursing home residents to outside appointments. As far as Sunset Manor will know, you're going for routine testing related to your hip recovery. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Elena gave me a final piece of advice. Mrs. Thompson, the hardest part of this process isn't going to be the legal proceedings or the medical evaluations. It's going to be accepting that your children are capable of what they've done to you. Many of my clients struggle with that more than anything else. She was right. Even with all the evidence, even knowing what Linda and Michael had stolen from me, part of me still wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding that could be resolved with honest conversation. But as Sarah helped me back into the car for our return trip to Sunset Manor, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The possibility of freedom. For the first time since my fake fall, I had allies, a plan, and hope for the future. The war for my independence had officially begun. The plan had to be perfect in its deception. Patricia worked with Elena to arrange what appeared to be a routine medical follow-up for my hip recovery, complete with proper paperwork and scheduling through Sunset Manor's medical transport protocols. To anyone checking the records, it would look like a standard appointment with an orthopedic specialist. In reality, I was being taken to Dr. Amanda Chen, a neurologist who specialized in dementia diagnosis and had extensive experience testifying in elder abuse cases. The morning of the evaluation, I was more nervous than I'd been since Harold's funeral. Everything depended on Dr. Chen's assessment. If she found any evidence of cognitive decline, even mild age-related changes that might be normal for someone my age, it could undermine my entire case. Patricia helped me prepare by reviewing the types of tests I might encounter, memory assessments, problem-solving exercises, language comprehension tasks, and detailed questions about my personal history and current events. Just be yourself, she advised as the medical transport van arrived. Don't try to overstudy or second-guess the questions. Your mind is sharp, Margaret. Trust it. Dr. Chen's office was nothing like the sterile, impersonal environment at Sunset Manor. Her waiting room had comfortable chairs, current magazines, and artwork that suggested someone who understood that elderly patients deserve dignity and respect. When she called me back to her office, Dr. Chen introduced herself and explained what we'd be doing. Mrs. Thompson, I understand you're here because there are questions about a dementia diagnosis that was made without proper neurological evaluation. I'm going to conduct a comprehensive assessment of your cognitive function, and I want you to know that I'll be completely honest in my findings, regardless of what anyone hopes those findings will be. The evaluation took nearly 3 hours. Dr. Chen tested my memory with word lists and story recall exercises. She assessed my problem-solving abilities with puzzles and logical reasoning tasks. She evaluated my language skills, my spatial awareness, my ability to follow complex instructions, and my understanding of abstract concepts. Throughout the process, she also interviewed me extensively about my life history, my education, my career, and my current situation. She asked detailed questions about the events leading up to my placement at Sunset Manor, and she listened carefully to my responses without interrupting or showing skepticism. When we finished, Dr. Chen asked me to wait while she reviewed her notes and scoring sheets. 20 minutes later, she invited me back into her office with an expression I couldn't read. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to give you my preliminary findings with the understanding that I'll need to review everything more carefully before writing my formal report." My heart was pounding as I waited for her verdict. "Based on today's evaluation, I see no evidence of dementia or significant cognitive impairment. Your memory function is excellent, your reasoning skills are intact, your language abilities are normal, and your judgment appears sound. In fact, your cognitive performance is better than many people half your age." Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I nearly started crying. "Are you certain?" "Mrs. Thompson, dementia isn't a subtle condition that can be easily missed or faked. It involves measurable changes in brain function that show up clearly on comprehensive testing. You don't have those changes." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression growing serious. "What you do have is a fraudulent medical record that was created to justify your placement in memory care. Whoever wrote those initial reports describing your supposed cognitive decline was either grossly incompetent or deliberately falsifying information." She explained that she'd be writing a detailed report documenting my cognitive abilities and specifically refuting the earlier claims about my mental status. She'd also include recommendations for my immediate discharge from memory care and restoration of my legal rights. "Dr. Chen, can I ask you something personal? How often do you see cases like mine?" Her expression darkened. "More often than I'd like to admit. Elder abuse by family members is an epidemic, and fake dementia diagnoses are a common tool for gaining control of an elderly person's assets. The sad truth is that many victims never get the help you're getting." As the medical transport van brought me back to Sunset Manor, I felt like a different person than the confused, frightened woman who'd left that morning. I had proof of my competency, professional validation of my claims, and powerful ammunition for the legal battle ahead. But I also knew that the hardest part was just beginning. Dr. Chen's report would force a confrontation with Linda and Michael, and they wouldn't surrender their control without a fight. That evening, Patricia found an excuse to check on me privately. "How did it go?" she whispered. Dr. Chen confirmed everything we suspected. I don't have dementia, never had dementia, and the original diagnosis was fraudulent. Patricia's smile was fierce with satisfaction. "Elena called me this afternoon. The private investigator has traced your financial records, and what he's found is even worse than we thought." She handed me a folded piece of paper with preliminary findings. In addition to my stolen Social Security and pension payments, Linda and Michael had taken out a home equity loan against my house using the forged power of attorney. They'd also liquidated some of my investment accounts and used my credit cards to pay for personal expenses. The total amount of theft was approaching $200,000. "Margaret, Elena wants to move quickly now. She's going to file emergency papers to freeze your assets and prevent any further theft. She's also going to request a court hearing to invalidate the power of attorney and restore your legal rights." "How long before Linda and Michael find out?" "Probably by the end of the week. Elena will serve them with papers and they'll realize their game is over." I thought about my children's reactions when they discovered I'd been fighting back all along. The shock, the anger, the desperate scrambling to cover their tracks and protect themselves. Part of me felt sad for them. They were still my children, and I'd loved them their entire lives. But a bigger part of me felt something I hadn't experienced in months: righteous anger and the fierce satisfaction of fighting back against injustice. They'd underestimated their victim. They'd assumed I was too old, too confused, and too isolated to resist their theft. They were about to learn how wrong they'd been. The confrontation came on a Thursday morning, exactly 10 weeks after my arrival at Sunset Manor. Linda and Michael arrived together, unannounced, with expressions I'd never seen before, panic mixed with desperate calculation. They'd obviously been served with Elena's legal papers and had spent the night trying to figure out how to contain the damage. I was in the activities room when they found me, sitting at a table by the window and working on a crossword puzzle that I'd deliberately chosen for its difficulty. When I saw them approaching, I discreetly activated my hidden recorder and prepared for the most important conversation of my life. "Mom," Linda said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, "we need to talk. Privately." "Of course, dear. How are you both doing? You look stressed." Michael pulled up chairs, so they were sitting directly across from me, their faces serious, and their body language aggressive in a way I'd never experienced from my own children. "Mom, we got some very disturbing paperwork yesterday," Linda began. "Apparently someone has been filling your head with lies and convincing you to make accusations against your own family." I kept my expression neutral and my voice calm. "What kind of accusations, Linda? You're claiming that we stole your money, that we lied about your medical condition, that we had you placed here against your will. Mom, these are serious allegations that could destroy our reputations and our careers. Are they untrue allegations?" The question hung in the air between us like a blade. Linda and Michael exchanged glances, and I could see them trying to decide how to respond. "Mom, you're confused about what's been happening," Michael said, his tone patronizing in a way that made my teeth clench. "You signed papers giving us authority to manage your finances because you weren't able to handle them yourself anymore. We've been protecting your assets and making sure your bills get paid. Michael, can you show me my signature on those papers?" Another glance between them. "Mom, you signed them. You just don't remember because of your memory problems." "What? Specific memory problems? Can you give me an example of something important that I've forgotten?" Linda leaned forward, her professional mask slipping to reveal something harder underneath. "Mom, this conversation is exactly what we mean. You're asking the same questions over and over. You're paranoid about people trying to hurt you. You're making wild accusations that don't make any sense. Linda, I'd like you to name one wild accusation I've made that isn't true." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Finally, Michael tried a different approach. "Mom, whoever has been talking to you, filling your head with these ideas, they don't have your best interests at heart. They're probably trying to take advantage of you financially." "You mean the way you've been taking advantage of me financially?" Linda's composure cracked. "Mom, we are your children. We love you. We've been taking care of you since Dad died, making sure you're safe and comfortable. How can you accuse us of trying to hurt you?" "Linda, where is my Social Security money?" "Being deposited? Into your account, Mom. Where it's always been deposited." "Which account? What's the account number? What bank?" More silence. Then Michael tried to redirect. "Mom, these financial details are complicated. That's why Linda and I are handling them for you." "Michael, who is renting my house? What do you mean?" "You told the billing office here that rental income from my house was helping to pay for my care. Who are my tenants?" I watched them realize that I knew far more about their deception than they'd thought possible. Linda's face had gone pale, and Michael was fidgeting with his car keys like he wanted to escape. "Mom," Linda said, her voice taking on a desperate edge, "you're obviously having a bad day. Dr. Martinez warned us that patients with dementia sometimes have episodes where they become agitated and paranoid." "Linda, when was I diagnosed with dementia? What doctor performed the neurological evaluation?" "Dr. Peterson." "Dr. Peterson isn't a neurologist, Linda. He's a family physician. When did he conduct comprehensive cognitive testing to diagnose dementia?" The trap was closing around them, and they both knew it. Linda made one final attempt to regain control of the conversation. "Mom, I think we need to talk to Dr. Martinez about adjusting your medications. This kind of agitation and paranoid thinking could be dangerous if it gets worse." That's when I played my ace. "Linda, Michael, I want you both to listen very carefully. Yesterday I had a comprehensive neurological evaluation by Dr. Amanda Chen, a board-certified specialist in dementia diagnosis. Her findings were very clear. I have no cognitive impairment whatsoever. I don't have dementia, I never had dementia, and my placement here was based on fraudulent medical information." The color drained from both their faces. "Furthermore, I've been recording our conversations for the past month, including this one. I have documented evidence of your lies, your theft of my money, and your conspiracy to control my assets through false medical claims." Michael started to stand up. "Mom, you can't—" "Sit down, Michael." My voice carried the authority I'd developed from 35 years of managing unruly teenagers. "I'm not finished." He sat. "I've retained an attorney who specializes in elder abuse cases. She's already filed papers to freeze my accounts, invalidate the fraudulent power of attorney, and begin criminal proceedings against both of you for financial exploitation of an elderly person." Linda was shaking now. "Mom, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly, Linda. You and Michael decided that your financial problems were more important than my rights and dignity. You lied to medical professionals, forged legal documents, stole my money, and tried to sell my house without my consent. I leaned forward, looking directly into their eyes. But here's what you didn't understand. I remember everything. Every lie you told, every dollar you stole, every conversation where you discussed how much easier your lives would be when I was out of the way. The recording device captured every word of what happened next. Their desperate attempts to explain away their actions, their promises to fix everything, their threats about what would happen if I continued with legal action. Most importantly, it captured their complete admission of guilt as they tried to negotiate their way out of the consequences they were facing. When they finally left, defeated and desperate, I sat alone in the activities room and realized that I felt something I hadn't experienced since Harold's death: complete and total victory over people who had tried to destroy me. The war wasn't over yet, but the most important battle had been won. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with simple wood paneling and fluorescent lighting that gave everything a harsh, institutional feel. But despite its modest appearance, this room would determine whether I regained control of my life or remained trapped in the nightmare my children had created. Elena sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, her briefcase filled with 3 months' worth of evidence documenting the systematic theft and fraud. Across the aisle, Linda and Michael sat with their attorney, a nervous-looking man who'd clearly realized his clients had little chance of defending their actions. Judge Patricia Williams was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen every form of human deception imaginable. She'd spent 20 minutes reviewing our case file before calling the hearing to order, and her expression grew progressively more stern as she read. "This is a petition for emergency restoration of legal rights and assets in a case of alleged elder abuse," Judge Williams began. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand you're requesting immediate discharge from memory care and full restoration of financial control." "Yes, Your Honor. And you're alleging that your placement in the nursing home was based on fraudulent medical information provided by your children?" "That's correct, Your Honor." Elena stood to present our case, methodically walking through the evidence we'd gathered. Dr. Chen's neurological evaluation proving my cognitive competency, the recordings of my conversations with Dr. Martinez showing that no proper dementia assessment had been conducted, the financial records documenting systematic theft of my Social Security, pension, and rental income. Most damning of all was the recording of my confrontation with Linda and Michael, where they'd essentially admitted their guilt while trying to negotiate their way out of consequences. When Elena finished her presentation, the judge turned to Linda and Michael's attorney. "Counselor, how do you respond to these allegations?" The defense attorney, Mr. Carson, stood reluctantly. "Your Honor, my clients maintain that they were acting in their mother's best interests based on legitimate concerns about her cognitive decline." "Do you have medical evidence supporting a dementia diagnosis?" A long pause. "Your Honor, the original assessment was conducted by Mrs. Thompson's longtime family physician based on observations from family members. A family physician who isn't qualified to diagnose dementia, based on reports from non-medical family members who, according to the evidence presented here, had significant financial incentives to have Mrs. Thompson declared incompetent. Your Honor, my clients believed—" Judge Williams held up her hand. "Counselor, let me ask a more direct question. Can you provide any objective medical evidence, neurological testing, cognitive assessments, brain imaging studies that supports the claim that Mrs. Thompson has dementia?" Another pause. Even longer this time. "No, Your Honor." "Can you explain why approximately $200,000 from Mrs. Thompson's accounts has been transferred to accounts controlled by your clients?" "Your Honor, my clients were managing their mother's finances under power of attorney to ensure her care costs were covered." Mr. Carson, according to the financial records, Mrs. Thompson's monthly income was more than sufficient to cover her nursing home costs. Where did the excess money go? The defense attorney shuffled through his papers, clearly stalling. "Your Honor, my clients used some of those funds to maintain Mrs. Thompson's house and address various emergencies." Mr. Carson, Mrs. Thompson's house was listed for sale without her knowledge or consent. Her personal belongings were disposed of without permission. Her credit cards were used for purchases that appear to be personal expenses for your clients. How do you explain these actions as being in her best interests? Linda and Michael's attorney had no answer. After several seconds of painful silence, Judge Williams continued, "Mrs. Thompson, I'd like to ask you some questions directly." "Of course, Your Honor." For the next 15 minutes, Judge Williams conducted her own informal cognitive assessment, asking me about current events, complex calculations, and detailed questions about my personal history and the case itself. I answered every question, clearly and completely, demonstrating the kind of mental acuity that would be impossible for someone with dementia. When she finished, Judge Williams addressed the entire courtroom. "In 40 years on the bench, I've seen many heartbreaking cases of family members taking advantage of elderly relatives. This case is particularly egregious because of the systematic nature of the deception and the complete violation of trust involved." She turned to Linda and Michael. "Ms. Thompson and Mr. Thompson, your actions constitute multiple felonies: financial exploitation of an elderly person, fraud, forgery, and false imprisonment. The evidence against you is overwhelming. And your attorney's inability to mount any meaningful defense suggests that even he recognizes the strength of the case." Linda started to speak, but Judge Williams silenced her with a look. "However, this is a civil hearing to address Mrs. Thompson's immediate needs. The criminal charges will be handled separately by the district attorney's office, and I'm ordering that this case be referred to them immediately." The judge then issued a series of orders that felt like music to my ears. Immediate restoration of all my financial accounts, cancellation of the fraudulent power of attorney, freeze on any further asset transfers, and my immediate discharge from Sunset Manor with full restoration of legal rights. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, "I'm ordering Mr. and Ms. Thompson to return every penny they've stolen from their mother, plus interest and penalties. They have 30 days to comply, or they'll face contempt of court charges in addition to the criminal charges they're already facing." As we left the courtroom, Elena squeezed my arm. "Margaret, you did it. You got your life back." Behind us, I could hear Linda crying and Michael arguing with their attorney about appeals and damage control. But their voices seemed to come from another world, a world where I was a victim instead of a victor. Patricia was waiting in the courthouse lobby, having taken personal time to attend the hearing. She hugged me tightly, and I could see tears in her eyes. "How does it feel to be free?" she asked. I thought about the question as we walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sunshine. How did it feel to be free? It felt like waking up from a nightmare. It felt like Harold was watching over me with pride. It felt like justice served and dignity restored. But mostly, it felt like coming home to myself after months of being treated like a stranger in my own life. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee in the same pot Harold and I had used for 20 years, watching the sun stream through windows that no stranger would ever look through again. The house was mine again. Not just legally, but emotionally. Every room had been reclaimed from the violation of my children's betrayal and restored to the sanctuary Harold and I had created together. The legal proceedings had concluded with exactly the justice I'd hoped for. Linda and Michael both pled guilty to elder abuse and financial exploitation charges, receiving sentences that included jail time, substantial fines, and complete restitution of the money they'd stolen. More importantly, they were required to perform community service at elder care facilities where they'd learn firsthand about the dignity and respect they'd denied their own mother. The money they returned, every penny, plus interest and penalties, had been restored to my accounts. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that I'd fought for myself when it mattered most, that I'd refused to become a victim, and that justice had prevailed over greed and manipulation. Sarah walked into the kitchen carrying fresh flowers from the garden we'd been working on together. My granddaughter had moved in with me temporarily after graduating college, ostensibly to help me readjust to independent living, but really because we both enjoyed each other's company and she was saving money for graduate school. "Grandma?" "Elena called," Sarah said, arranging the flowers in the vase Harold had made in a pottery class years ago. "The Elder Advocacy Organization wants you to speak at their annual conference next month. They think your story could help other families recognize the warning signs of financial abuse." The invitation didn't surprise me. Over the past 6 months, I'd become something of an accidental activist, working with Elena and other attorneys to help elderly people who were facing similar situations. My case had received media attention that helped other victims come forward, and I'd discovered a purpose I'd never expected in my retirement years. "What do you think I should tell them?" I asked Sarah. "Tell them what you told me when this all started, that being elderly doesn't mean being helpless, and that family members who truly love you don't steal from you or lie about your medical condition to control your money." She was right, of course. The most important lesson from my experience wasn't about legal strategies or financial protection, though those things mattered. It was about recognizing that respect and dignity don't have expiration dates, and that fighting for your rights is never too late or too difficult if you have the courage to begin. Patricia had left Sunset Manor 3 months earlier to work for Elena's law firm as a victim advocate, helping other elderly people navigate the complex intersection of medical care and legal rights. We had lunch together every Tuesday, and she often brought me updates about other cases they were handling. "You started something important, Margaret," she'd told me during our most recent lunch. "Your case has changed how nursing homes verify dementia diagnoses and how banks handle financial transactions for elderly customers. You didn't just save yourself, you've helped protect other people too." The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. I expected it to be one of my Tuesday book club friends, or maybe Dr. Chen's office confirming my 6-month follow-up appointment. Instead, I heard a familiar voice that I hadn't spoken to in months. "Mom?" It was Linda, her voice small and uncertain. "I know I don't have the right to call you, but I needed to tell you something." I sat down in my favorite chair, the same one that had been removed from my house during their staging for sale, and prepared myself for whatever was coming. "I'm sorry," Linda said, and I could hear that she was crying. "I'm sorry for everything we did to you. I'm sorry for lying about your condition, for stealing your money, for treating you like you were already dead. I'm sorry for forgetting that you're my mother, and that you raised me to be better than what I became." The apology was genuine, I could tell, but it was also 6 months too late and several $100,000 short of adequate. "Linda, why are you calling me now?" "Because I've been working at the nursing home for my community service, and I see what we did to you every single day. I see elderly people whose families truly care about them, and I see others whose families are just waiting for them to die. I realized that we became the second kind of family, and I can't live with that anymore." I listened to my daughter cry for several minutes, feeling a complex mixture of emotions that I was still sorting through. Anger, sadness, disappointment, and underneath it all, the stubborn love that never quite dies between parents and children, even when it probably should. "Linda, I appreciate your apology, but I need you to understand that what you and Michael did changed our relationship permanently. I can forgive you, but I cannot trust you again." "I know," she whispered. "I know we destroyed something that can't be fixed. But Mom, I needed you to know that I remember who you really are now. You're not the confused old woman we pretended you were. You're the strongest person I've ever known, and I'm ashamed that it took losing you to remember that." After she hung up, I sat in my quiet house thinking about the strange turns life could take. A year ago, I'd been a lonely widow trying to manage my declining years with dignity. Today, I was a survivor, an advocate, and someone who'd learned that fighting for justice could be the most meaningful work of a lifetime. Sarah found me there an hour later, still holding the phone and looking out at the garden where Harold's roses were blooming again. "Was that Mom?" she asked. "Yes," she apologized. "How do you feel about that?" I thought about the question carefully. I feel sad for the time we lost and the relationship we'll never have again. But I also feel proud of who I became when I had to fight for myself. Sometimes people have to be broken before they remember how to be whole. That evening, as I prepared for bed in my own bedroom in my own house, I looked at the framed photograph on my dresser. Harold and me on our 40th wedding anniversary, both of us laughing at some joke I couldn't remember anymore, but whose joy I could still feel. "We did it, Harold," I whispered to his picture. "We protected what we built together, and nobody gets to take that away from us." As I turned off the lights, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from having fought the good fight and won. Not just in court, but in the larger battle for dignity, respect, and the right to control your own life, regardless of your age. Tomorrow I would wake up in my own bed, in my own house, with my own money safely in accounts that only I controlled. I would make my own decisions, choose my own activities, and live according to my own values. At 72 years old, I had learned that it's never too late to fight for yourself, and that sometimes the most important victories come when people least expect you to be capable of winning them. I'd spent 3 months being treated like I was helpless and confused. I'd spent the rest of my life proving exactly how wrong they were.